You know, a lot can happen in a week, right? Especially when you're talking about the White House. So what we're going to do is break down every single major announcement from just one week, the last week of January 2026. Because when you look at all these actions together, you start to see a much bigger picture emerge. It's a snapshot of an administration's priorities, its agenda, and really its vision for the country.
So that's the big question, isn't it? What can a president actually get done in just one week? Well, as it turns out, a whole lot. We're talking major policy rollouts, executive orders, symbolic gestures, international meetings, you name it. A single week can give you this incredibly dense snapshot of an administration's agenda in full swing. It's a really fascinating way to see how policy goes from just an idea on paper to something real.
All right, to get our heads around all this, we've broken the week's announcements down into 4 key areas. First, we'll look at the economy in shaping the American wallet. Then we'll pivot to foreign policy with projecting power abroad. After that, we'll see how they address challenges right here at home in tackling crises at home. And we'll wrap things up with the more symbolic side of things in celebrating American identity. Let's kick things off with the economy.
Okay, first up, the economy. A bunch of the week's announcements were aimed squarely at tax policy and financial leadership, with the goal of impacting everything from your annual tax refund to who's running the Federal Reserve.
So, the biggest piece of economic news from this week was definitely the Working Families Tax Cuts Act. The administration is claiming this will lead to the largest tax refund season we've ever seen. The whole idea here is to get rid of federal taxes on tips and overtime pay for hourly workers, and also to make Social Security benefits completely tax-free. I mean, these are changes that would have a direct impact on the take-home pay for millions of people.
And this chart right here really puts that into perspective. What you're seeing is the projected impact, and the jump for the 2025 tax year is pretty stark. They're citing an estimate from the Tax Foundation, and they project the average refund is going to hit $3,800. That's a jump of almost 25% from the average of the last couple of years.
But it's not just about the refund check. The administration also dropped this number, $4,000. This figure, they say, represents the average total tax savings a taxpayer should expect to see in 2026 because of the new act. It's a really tangible number, and it's meant to drive home the direct financial benefit for individuals and families. And the focus on the economy wasn't just at the federal level. The administration also put out this report from the Council of Economic Advisors, basically making the case for states to get rid of their own income taxes. The argument is that doing this would create a more competitive, pro-growth environment across the whole country, getting state policy in line with the federal agenda.
So let's break down what that report actually says. The argument is that ditching a state income tax basically turns a state into a powerful magnet for economic activity. They're projecting not just a boost in GDP and wages, but a huge 16 to 19% jump in new business startups. And the report suggests that states that do this could attract a significant number of high-income taxpayers, which in theory would boost investment and spending.
And to try and show what this looks like on the ground, the White House put out this economic snapshot from Iowa. According to this document, because of the administration's policies, the average family there is saving over $3,000 on taxes. Gas prices are way down from their peak, and it's becoming easier to afford a home.
And to cap off a big week for the economy, there was the nomination of Kevin Warsh to be the next chairman of the Federal Reserve. This was a huge deal. It was met with a lot of praise from business and political circles, with the Wall Street Journal's editorial board going so far as to call it the president's best second-term appointment. This is a big deal, signaling a really major shift in leadership at the nation's central bank.
All right, let's shift gears from the economy at home to how the administration is projecting American power around the world. The actions this week included a major national security move related to Cuba and also a more cooperative effort with India. Okay, before we dive into what they did, we got to understand the tool they used to do it. The administration invoked something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA for short. Basically, this law gives the president really broad authority to control trade with other countries once a national emergency has been declared, which is exactly what happened here.
So you might be asking, why declare a national emergency over Cuba?
Well, the executive order laid out a whole list of reasons. It claims the Cuban government is working with U.S. adversaries, hosting Russian intelligence operations, giving safe haven to terrorist groups, and committing human rights violations. All of this was laid out as the justification for imposing a new tariff system on any country that sells oil to Cuba.
Now, it wasn't all about sanctions. On a more cooperative note, The U.S. also hosted the very first meeting of the U.S.-India Drug Policy Executive Working Group. The whole point here was to strengthen the partnership between the two countries to fight narco-terrorism and the flow of illegal drugs. It's a problem that, has very clear connections to the addiction crisis back here in the United States.
Okay, let's bring our focus back to the home front. This next set of announcements from the week deals with a pretty wide range of domestic challenges, everything from the addiction crisis and disaster recovery to immigration enforcement and trying to cut through government red tape.
A really big move this week was an executive order that kicked off the Great American Recovery Initiative to deal with substance use disorder. And its mission is pretty broad. It's supposed to coordinate the entire federal government's response, raise public awareness, make sure treatment and prevention are better integrated across different agencies, steer grant money where it's needed, and work with local partners to figure out the best strategies.
Next up, another executive order, this one dealing with the aftermath of wildfires in California. The administration stepped in because of what they said was a really slow pace of rebuilding. So here's their reasoning. They pointed to what they called local failures, citing that only 10 homes have been rebuilt a year after the fires. The order basically tells FEMA to override those local permitting rules and lets builders self-certify that they're in compliance, all to speed up reconstruction.
Shifting over to immigration, the White House border czar Tom Homan held a press conference up in Minnesota, and this quote from him really sums up the administration's stated priorities for enforcement. He stressed that the focus is on people who are considered public safety or national security threats, but he also made it very clear that anyone who is in the country illegally could still face removal.
And finally for this section, there was an announcement aimed at something a lot of people complain about: government red tape. The administration unveiled a new tech platform called C-Works. The idea is to speed up environmental reviews for big projects, think bridges and wind farms. It helps agencies use something called categorical exclusions, which is basically a fast track for projects that are known to not have a significant environmental impact, to cut through all that bureaucracy. And for our last stop, we're moving from policy to something a bit more symbolic. These actions are all about celebrating American history, culture, and national identity, and a lot of them are tied to the big America 250 celebration that's going on.
So this week was President William McKinley's birthday, and the White House put out a message to celebrate his legacy. This quote is really key because it draws a direct line from McKinley's use of tariffs and his America First policies to the economic policies of the current administration. It's all about framing what's happening today within a specific historical context.
There was also a more solemn moment this week, marking the 40th anniversary of the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. The administration used the occasion not just to honor the crew's legacy, but also to recommit to some really ambitious goals for space exploration. Specifically, they mentioned getting back to the moon by 2028 and eventually sending a crewed mission to Mars.
And in what was probably one of the more surprising announcements of the week for the America 250 celebration, an executive order was signed to create something called the Freedom 250 Grand Prix. This is going to be the first ever IndyCar street race right in Washington, D.C., with a route designed to go right past the national monuments. The order tells federal agencies to fast-track all the permits needed to make it a reality.
So wow, there you have it. Tax policy, foreign relations, disaster relief, national celebrations, all crammed into a single week. It's a dizzying amount of activity. Sure, each action tells its own story, but the real question is, what story do they tell when you put them all together? What does this whirlwind of activity really tell us about the kind of future this administration is trying to build? That's the question we'll leave you with.